Hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar, PSADT 101, what it is, why you need it, and how to get started. If you want to skip forward a slide there, Dan. So we're going to just go over a couple of intros and some webinar basics. We've basically an overview of what PSADT is. We have some surprise news, which is a new release of PSADT, and we'll be getting Sean to go through what's in that. Then we're going to go through creating a custom deployment and just some basics around the toolkit, and we'll jump into some tech demos around best practices, some real world examples, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. Okay, well, I guess a couple of introductions. On the call today, you've got myself. I'm Dan Cunningham. I'm one of the co-founders of PSADT, and now I work for Patch My PC. Sean?
Hi, I'm Sean Lillis, based in Dublin, Ireland. I'm also co-founder of the SCCM working in the endpoint management space. Mo?
Hey, my name is Mo Mishwani, and I've been working on the toolkit for many years, and I also work in the endpoint management cybersecurity space.
Hi, Dan Goff, a long-time user of PSADT and a recent starter at Patch My PC. I saw that Patch My PC had taken stewardship of the toolkit in their most recent webinar, which was one of the reasons made me really want to join here, and also the fact that gave me a great opportunity to seed chaos and confusion by having another Dan on the same team. And I'm glad to say that my plan is going according to plan. Dan's already getting tagged in all the support cases that are meant for me. It's driving him insane. So if there's anyone else out there named Dan that wants to join us, you know where to.
Yeah, the more the merrier. All right, so we'll just go through a few bits and pieces about. But for those of you who don't know what PSADT is, that could be, maybe you're a Patch My PC customer and you've not heard about it before, or you've just heard about it through Twitter or whatnot. Let's kind of just delve into it. So it is essentially a framework for improving the experience of deploying software to Windows endpoints at scale. Is probably the best way we can sum this up. So it allows you to encapsulate a software installer and enhance its capabilities. So if you have an install of, say, I don't know, WinZip or Notepad or something like that, we can add on additional functionality to it, like performing prerequisite checks, making sure the application is closed down before we install it, allowing for deferrals. So if we can pop up a message to say, do you want to defer this, or do you want to do the install now, or do you want to defer? We can do any sort of pre-installation tasks, uninstall any previous versions, things like that, and maybe capture important settings that might be required if it's in a migration from one version to another. We'll capture all sorts of logging information around both the installer itself. So if it's a Windows installer, we'll capture logging information there, but also any of the functions within the toolkit, we log that all as well. We can do things like perform post-installation configuration, prompt people for a reboot. We can put a timer on that, so they only have, like, say, 20 minutes or half an hour before their machine will automatically restart. And all of this is built with large enterprises in mind. The key thing when we started this was really we were working at a very large financial in Ireland, and stability was a key thing. So every single function is kind of battle tested, and that was kind of when it started, and now it's being battle tested by thousands of companies all over the world. Next slide. All right. So how is this a benefit to people? Well, firstly, it reduces the barrier to learning PowerShell. And it does this through having a standardized, customizable template, but it's a standard workflow that everyone essentially follows. We provide dozens of easy-to-use commandlets or for PowerShell functions that'll cover various different deployment tasks, things like copy files, write registry, show progress message, things like that. And we have very, very clear and concise documentation for every function, as well as just general usage. As I said, it's battle tested. It's built with enterprise environments in mind, where stability is kind of a crucial thing. and it's used by a lot of Fortune 500 companies, federal government, banks, global brands. It's also used by package factories, military, healthcare, consultants are using it as well, and it's being run on millions of endpoints every day. It's a widely adopted standard as well for various deployment teams because it allows them to adhere to best practices. Being a standard means deployments are pretty much easily understood by other people. Like if someone builds one, then if someone else in a team can understand it. It means picking up work between colleagues is very, very easy. Everyone immediately understands it, and it simplifies collaboration and increases supportability. As well as that, it's recommended and endorsed by a number of big players in the space. So the likes of Master Packager, Flexera, Raynet, all have endorsed it. In fact, Flexera have said it's the de facto standard for application wrapping. And there's basically a number of companies now make it a prerequisite for job applications. Yeah, it's pretty much standard throughout the industry. Simplifies deployment troubleshooting through best practice workflows, functions that handle errors gracefully. We've built in functions that have extensive logging. MSI log files get captured automatically. They're all logged to the CM trace format, which is what SCCM uses. And having that all put together makes issues very easy to troubleshoot. Integrates with SCCM and Intune. It'll also integrate with Tanium Deploy, BigFix, Amanti, and Workspace ONE, and pretty much anything that can deploy applications. It's very customizable, so you can change up the banners and logos. All the text strings can be replaced with your own corporate language if you want, and it's localizable in any language. And most importantly, it's got extensive community support. So we have Discord forums, Discourse, Reddit. There's a lot of different places that you can go for help.
Yeah, before I joined Patch My PC, I was leading a packaging team, and we adopted it a number of years ago for a lot of these same reasons. We had a lot of people using batch files or VB scripts, all different standards, all weird and wonderful different ways of doing things. So we wanted to adopt a standard, and we ended up choosing this.
Good to know. All right, so that's kind of just an overview of what it is. Before, we didn't want to leave this to the end, so we'll just jump into a little bit about what the next release is about. Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Son. So today we're announcing the release of version 3.10. This will be made available for download later today, so don't go looking for it just yet. So we've been listening to your feedback on GitHub, also on forums, and from the last webinar we ran with Patch My PC. We've managed to get quite a few of your requests into this release, so there's definitely something in this for everyone using the toolkit. So here are the highlights. First up, if you're familiar with configuring Edge browser extensions in GPO, Intune, or the Edge Management Service, you might have found that your options are limited when it comes to targeting extensions to specific devices or users. Configure Edge extensions is a new function. It enables installing or uninstalling Edge browser extensions so they can be managed like applications. With this, you can do things like target extensions to specific users or devices, add extensions as dependencies of applications, or make them available in your software catalog. Copy content to cache is another new function, which enables caching of installation sources to a persistent local cache. So this one's particularly useful for folks who've migrated from configman to Intune and are missing a dedicated cache. Copy file to user profiles is another new function. This one enables copying and removing of files from user profiles, including the default profile for per machine installations. To support all of these new features, we've enhanced the copy file function to use robocopy by default. That was needed to overcome the 260 character limitation, path limitation with the native PowerShell method. You can toggle that off in the configuration if you so wish, if you have a reason not to use it. We've added log file rotation, so logs will rotate automatically at 10 megabyte size. The user interface components now support high DPI mode, and the icons and images have been updated for better brand consistency. There have also been some health improvements to the code base to improve overall performance and enable compliance with strict mode. And there's lots of fixes, including remediation of a number of long-standing issues, such as with execute process as user. Just a few other notable changes to mention. So we added a VS Code workspace with default settings, so that just helps ensure consistent code formatting. There are more options now for positioning of progress dialogues on screen. All registry functions now support 32-bit registry mode, and we've got a number of improved translations thanks to some community contributors and ChatGPT. So a quick shout out to all the folks in the community who helped to contribute to this release. There were some very notable contributions without naming names. You know who you are, but thanks a lot for your support. And yeah, as we said, the release should be available to grab later on today.
Great. All right. So I guess one thing that we wanted to just highlight after this is what we're planning to do is bring the 3.x range into a kind of a maintenance mode. We're trying to pivot onto version 4, which is going to be introducing some breaking changes. So we've been stuck on supporting PowerShell v2 and PowerShell 3 for a long time, and that means having support all the way back to, I think we might still support Windows XP, or at least it still works on Windows XP. And we need to kind of get rid of that luggage in order to start moving forward. So v4 will be the kind of the main major breaking change there will be to a supported platform for that Microsoft supports. So PowerShell 5.1. There may be a requirement for a .NET version. We're still working that out, but that will be the kind of the most visible breaking change. We're trying to make it so that nothing else changes in terms of your existing scripts. You should be able to migrate them over to v4, and everything should still work. You'll get a fresh lick of paint in terms of the UI, and there will be other changes, but in terms of how you migrate over to them, it should be nice and seamless, provided you're on a supported OS that has like PowerShell 5.1 and a certain version of .NET. We'll start doing a couple of more breaking changes after that, but we wanted to get up to this for our v4 release, kind of as the main kind of thing, the main focus area for v4. So we'll have some more information coming on v4 soon. We're going to be at PowerShell DevOps Global Summit, MMS MOA, and PSConf EU over the next month or two, and we'll have some more information for you then. All right, Dan, I think we're kicking over to, actually, Mo, are we kicking over to you?
All right. So, yeah, if you're familiar with GitHub, you can go download our latest release and releases page. We do not have the latest version out right now, but it will be soon after this webinar later today. So, yeah, if you're going on there right now, download the latest. You probably can't because it's not up yet.
So if you download the toolkit and extract it, this is what you'll see basically. You'll have the PSAppDeployToolkit folder, which contains the main functions of the toolkit. You'll have this files folder, which is typically where you want to place your MSI packages or your setup XCs, whatever it is that you're installing. Support files can be pretty much anything else related to the installation, if you want to keep that separate from the files folder. DeployApplication.exe we'll talk about later, but it's the main entry point to running the toolkit. It lets you execute the script without having to have the console window flash up to the user. And that's just a config file that goes along with that you typically don't really need to edit or do anything with. DeployApplication.ps1, this is the main toolkit script that you will be editing for each unique package that you make. And inside here, we have branding assets that you can customize. So you can have this banner completely replaced with your own corporate branding. The toolkit config.xml has got a bunch of settings in there that you may want to tweak. If you want to write any of your own extensions, you can put them in this file here, AppDeployToolkit extensions.ps1, and that lets you reuse the same PS1 file with all your favorite extensions across all your packages. And then each time there's a new toolkit release, you don't have to worry about, you can just pluck up that file and put it into the next release and it should just work. AppDeployToolkit help is a script that you can run that just pops up a little user interface with help file for all the functions. We have a logo in ICO format, which will be the icon that is visible, I think, in the top left of the dialog and perhaps on the taskbar also. And again, a PNG version of that.
And I think those are all high DPI now, right? That was one of the new changes. So it'll look better now on your larger screens.
Yes, indeed. So if you've customized any of your branding assets in the past, you might want to revisit that and make them bigger so they look better on 4K screens. There's some C# code in this as well, which is placed into that CS file there. And this last file here, that's the main PS1 with all of the functions that the toolkit uses. So first thing to do, choose your IDE, choose your weapon of choice, PowerShell ISE or VS Code with the PowerShell extension. I typically go for VS Code these days, but often you'll find yourself on a machine where you don't have it. You'll want to run your IDE as admin for full capabilities if you want to be able to do things like test and install out via the command line. Worth noting that with VS Code, that'll only work if it's the first instance of VS Code. You can run that as admin, but if you already have it running as a standard user, you can't open a second instance as admin. That drove me mad for a while. First thing you want to do is run this AppDeployToolkit main.ps1 in your session, and that will make all of the functions and the variables available for autocomplete, IntelliSense, and so that you can just test them in the console. If you don't already know and you're not already a PowerShell wizard, you'll want to know how to use these functions. When I learned how to use PowerShell, the first book that I read was Learn PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. And the first thing it did was teach you how to use these. And once you know how to use the help system in PowerShell, you can pretty much find anything that you need to know within the shell itself. You don't even need to go out and Google stuff. You can find the commands that you need. You can find all the functions and the methods and the properties on all the objects. You can find out what type your object is. And you can get very far just by knowing those three. And of course, read the documentation. We have a new website, don't we, Dan?
We do. PSAppDeployToolkit.com, and in terms of all of the help documentation, that's all up there, and there's a reference section as well for each of the commandlets and all the variables that you might want to use. There's a ton of really good info up there, and that's going to be updated later on today with more information from 3.10.
So back to those files I was mentioning. One that you might want to tweak is this toolkit config XML. So I think these are all default settings that I've got here. Yes, so some of these settings you might want to tweak, and I'll go through and explain why. Require admin. You want that nearly all the time, but sometimes you might be creating a per user installation. And if you want the toolkit to be able to execute without admin rights, you'll need to switch that to false. Of course, you won't be able to do certain things like write to HQ local machine or program files, etc. That goes without saying, really. The toolkit log path, by default, it will be C Windows logs software. I've seen people change that to the Intune logs folder in the past, so it makes it easy to grab the logs through the Intune portal. Or you might have another location where you want to put those. Toolkit log append, that's a new one for this release. If you leave it set to true, it'll be just as all the previous versions, where wherever you execute the toolkit, it will just append to the previous log file. If you set that to false, it will now create a new log file every time you execute the toolkit, and it will rename the old one with a timestamp. Use robocopy, that's a new tag as also. It's set to true by default. If in the unlikely eventuality that you find an issue with that, you can set it to false and it will go back to the old native PowerShell copy method, and you can obviously file an issue on GitHub and let us know about what's going on there. Another one that I like to tweak is the MSI install params. These are the default parameters that get sent to MSI exec when you're installing an MSI. These are the switches that get used when you're executing the toolkit in interactive mode. And with the QB there, that means that you'll have a progress bar flash up. The minus and the exclamation mark disable the cancel button and disable any other pop-ups. If you don't want those progress bars popping up during the installation, you might have multiple MSIs being triggered off and getting in the way of the user. You can switch that to QN. And show balloon notifications true. If you've already got pop-ups being shown to the user through SCCM or Intune, you're just going to end up doubling up on your notifications there, so you might want to switch those off as well. Mentioned earlier the branding assets. So we have the toolkit banner PNG, and we have this logo as well. And this is what it looks like as a typical dialog in the toolkit. So it's now in high DPI mode. All the text is sharp and not blurry anymore. The assets are all now higher resolution as well. It looks a lot nicer than it used to. Okay, so for starting off your first deployment, if you open up deployApplication.ps1, scroll around and get used to how the script looks. There's a lot in there. But if you scroll down to this section, you can edit the basics for your deployment. That'll be the vendor name, the application name, the version, architecture like x64. You can put the script date and the author name in there too. Worth mentioning, a feature that many might not know about or have used, but if you leave the app name empty, it'll activate a zero config mode where the toolkit will just grab these values from the MSI that it finds in the files folder. It will use that name in the pop-ups. It will use in the log files, and it will automatically just install or uninstall, depending on which mode you're running the toolkit, that MSI that it finds in that folder. So if you're just using it for a simple MSI, you don't even need to fill in this information or fill out the install commands. You can just take the raw toolkit and put your MSI in the files folder and you're good to go. Yeah, so you've got a number of install sections and uninstall sections, and there's also the same for repair, which I forgot to put in here. Another tip, after you've .sourced the deploy application PS1, you can run get variable or its alias GV, and you'll just get a big list of all the currently defined variables. There's a lot in there that might not even be in the docs. They're just ones that are created when the toolkit initializes. There's some useful ones in there as well. There's some standard ones that you might want to use during your installation process. There's dir files, which is the path of the files folder within the toolkit, and the same goes for support files. Common desktop, that is the all users desktop, typically C users public desktop. And common start menu programs, that's where most applications will put their shortcuts. Another one that I've tended to use in the past is run as user profile. That is the path of the user profile of the current logged on user. That can come in handy if you want to execute an uninstaller under that location, if you're trying to remove a per user install of an application. There's a few others in there. It's 64-bit process. If you ever need to choose a different installer for a 32-bit machine, for example, is multi-session OS. That's if you're on a Windows 11 multi-session, say for Azure Virtual Desktop, or if you're on a server. And we also populate a few variables for the Office platform or business channel and version. So going on these different installation sections, what might you typically want to do in these? Common tasks, you want to perform any pre-flight deployment checks before you pop up the user interface, before you install anything. So you might want to check, is there a higher version already installed of my application? If you're trying to install an app and there's already a higher version installed, you can detect that at this stage and exit gracefully. The user won't even see anything, perhaps. You might want to check that all the dependencies are installed. Of course, you might have some of your dependencies bundled in with the script, but if you haven't, you want to make sure that they're all present before you go any further. Is the application compatible with the OS? You might have an application that doesn't work on a server OS, for example, or that doesn't work with Windows 11. And then within this section is also where you will display your user interface, which is purely optional. You can run the toolkit in silent mode so that nothing is displayed. But if you have an application where you need to close the application before it gets updated, then this is a handy way to do it. You can either pop this dialog up, giving the user a chance to defer every single time the toolkit runs, or only if the application process is detected as running. The other use case in the pre-installation is you can remove applications by name. It's a useful toolkit function. Typically, if you want to uninstall an MSI, for example, you'll need the product code. And if you don't know that product code, it's very handy to be able to uninstall the application by its name. And if the name is varied over time, you can use a regex pattern for this as well. And also, if you have an application that you need to downgrade, you typically need to remove that future version before you can put the old one back on. As I mentioned earlier as well, removing per user installations. Some apps like Zoom, you might have a lot of users installing the per user version in their own user profiles, but then when IT want to come and manage that as an application and push out the per system install, and you want that to replace the per user install, that's where you can mop up some of these other applications in your pre-installation section. Another thing is a lot of applications come in two flavors, a setup exe and an MSI. And you'll want to remove the setup exe when you install the MSI or vice versa. Otherwise, you'll end up potentially with the application listed twice in have removed programs. And remove apps based on name matching, I said. Okay, so the functions that we've got here. So get installed application will return all of the applications on the system that match the parameters that you send here. So name, Zoom star with a wildcard, that will literally just bring back everything that starts with Zoom. You can ask it to pull back the information if an application exists with a specific product code. You can also get a bit fancy piping it into where object if you want to pull back, only the applications where a certain publisher is Zoom there, or this will make sure that it only filters through that the publisher is Zoom and that it's a 64-bit application and that the version is less than the version that we're trying to install. Remove MSI applications. Does what it says on the tin, really. You can remove every single application that has the name Java somewhere in the title. If you want to filter that to just remove the ones that were published by Oracle, you can do that too. We love Java here at Patch My PC. We are constantly finding new versions of Java to add to our catalog. And it's a great source of comedic value amongst the team. This one being my favorite. Getting onto the UI functions. Show installation welcome. That's the function that you'll use to bring up the user interface to either just give the user a warning that the application is about to be installed or to ask them to close the application. And show installation progress can be used to just show a message to the user as the application is installing. Some typical functions here for installing stuff. Execute process is if you want to install an executable. You can give it the parameters. I'll just call out a couple of the other switches that we're adding to this command example here. Wait for MSI exec. So with this VC-Redist executable, it actually has an MSI inside it, which it executes. And with Windows Installer, you can only install one MSI at a time. So if there happens to be another MSI already installing or repairing or whatever, that executable would fail. But putting that wait for MSI exec flag in there tells the toolkit to check if Windows Installer is busy before it executes. And if it is, it will just wait until it's freed up. Another typical problem with these VC-Redist is that they will fail if a newer version is already present. And they get updated all of the time, and other apps will install them freely. So that's quite common that they can fall over. So you'll want to put that execute on process failure false in there as well. If you ever wanted to execute something as the logged in user, for example, to uninstall a per user application, execute process as user will do that for you. This example on the screen uses the built-in variable that has that user's profile. If you have an MSI package, there is execute MSI. You can give it the action of install, uninstall, or repair. You can feed it the path to the MSI. It will automatically find the package within the files folder. If it's anywhere else, you'll have to give it the full path. Same goes for the transform. We flicked back earlier to the config XML, which showed the default parameters that will be used for every MSI installation. The add parameters thing here that we have just appends whatever you supply to those defaults. You can also have dash parameters instead of add parameters, and it will replace those defaults. Useful stuff to have in the post-installation scenario. Typically, you want to delete some shortcuts. You might want to create some shortcuts. You may want to copy files either to a fixed location like the application installation folder or to all user profiles. You can set registry keys. Again, you can do that for all users on the system using the functions that we have in the toolkit. Might want to set permissions, register DLLs, or create an active setup. For those that are unfamiliar, active setup is a Microsoft thing that was kind of discovered by IT pros and hijacked, and it turned into a standard in the packaging world where it's never been documented to my knowledge, but it's a way of doing a run once action per user. You set up a registry key, and then each time the user logs on, it'll run that command and put a marker in the current user registry to say it's done it. And it has a version associated with it as well, so you can bump up that version and it will rerun. If you use the toolkit functions to set up your active setup, though, it will gives you another advantage that it will automatically run it for the current logged in user straight away, so that they don't have to log off and log back on again. So there's an example of using remove file to get rid of a desktop shortcut and an uninstall shortcut from the programs. You can use a comma here to supply multiple shortcuts in one line, so you don't need to call remove file over and over again. If for some reason your installer didn't provide the shortcut you want, you can create your own using this function, new shortcut, as well. Copy file. You may think, why use a function for something so basic as copying a file when there's copy item in PowerShell already? Two reasons really is, one, it will log everything to the log file, and secondly, if the destination folder doesn't exist, this function will pre-create it for you. Copy file to user profiles. This is a brand new one. So if you have a config file for your application that you want to give to every single user on the system, this is how you would do that. Give it the path to the source file, and the destination will be the folder to append to C user's username. You might want to set some registry keys to do with your application, such as disabling an automatic updater. And I did see somebody, when we mentioned the copy file to user profile, somebody put in the chat, can we have this for registry too? It's actually been in there for as long as I can remember, actually, a long time. But it's a bit more complicated to implement. You have to set up a script block that sets your registry keys, and then you invoke it with this second line. But it's there and it works. The advantage of having it in a script block like that is that you can actually read the registry key for each user and act upon it and do something with that. So if you have any more complicated scenarios where you want to manage user registry, then this is quite handy. Other things you might want to do is set permissions. If you need, for example, to give the users group, modify permissions on a folder. There's an example showing that. As you can see, I'm using the SID S1532545 for that, because if you refer to users by name, it will only work on an English OS. In French, it's something like utilisateurs, and every other language has got its own different name for it. So I advise to use a SID for anything like that. You can register a DLL and set active setup. as I mentioned earlier. So you give it the key, which will be the registry key that it logs it underneath. Description and the version. These active setups, for some reason, use a comma instead of a dot for the versions. And you give it the executable path and the arguments to run for each user. So once you've got your script set up, you can perform a basic interactive installation just by running deployApplication.ps1. DeployApplication.exe gives you a nice way to launch that toolkit without the console flashing up to the user. And that supports a number of switches, as you can see on screen there: install, uninstall, or repair. And you can have it run as silent or interactive. Another thing to be aware of is that the toolkit will mask any 3010 exit codes and turn them to zeros and report 0 back to Config Manager or Intune. If you want those 3010s, which is the code for a reboot required, to be passed back to your deployment system, you'll need to add that allow reboot pass-through switch as well. Another thing to be aware of is if you're using Config Manager and you want to be able to enable that user interface, make sure you select that option shown on screen there. Allow users to view and interact with the program installation. Otherwise, they will not see anything. Potential security risk there is that if you've got an installer that is running interactively and the installer has any help links or file browser buttons on it, they can be used to gain access to see Windows and open up a command prompt, for example, running as system. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything like that in your installers. Intune, though, does not have that same option that I just showed on the previous slide, that allow users to view and interact. Everything that Intune runs when you're doing a system context installation will be completely hidden from view. The common workaround to this is to use service UI.exe, which is part of Microsoft's deployment toolkit, MDT. This tool needs to know the name of a process that's running in user space so that it can hook into it and it knows which session to display the application to. So this is the syntax shown here. So typical process that is used in this scenario is explorer.exe. If you've got a user logged on, explorer.exe will be running, and then Service UI can look that up and it knows to display the deploy application.exe to that user. I believe in 4.0 there are plans to build something like this into the toolkit so that we don't have to rely on this workaround.
Yeah, do we want to take a few questions before we jump into some demos? Are there any questions that stood out that we want to address before we start getting into some more of these demos?
Before we do, I just thought I'd let everyone know 3.10 is now live for download.
Should we look at some of these questions?
Yes. Any that pop up? Let's see here.
Hey, Corey. There was one in chat that wasn't in Slido that I think is going to come up every webinar. So I'll just answer it again. So it's about Patch MyPC taking over the stewardship and working with Sean and Dan and Mo on PSADT. And when are we going to start charging for it? And we are never going to charge for PSADT. We're going to keep it open source and free as it has been. And as these guys have been showing today, we're going to keep iterating it. There was a question about, well, we've heard that story before from other open source stewards. You know, do you really mean it? What's in it for you? And what's in it for us is Patch MyPC is a company that is very committed to improving lives and building technology that improves lives in IT. Yes, we do charge for some of what we do, but we also, if you look at the number of people that we've hired that worked in the community, that are passionate about the community and giving back, we do a lot of things just for the sake of it's good and it helps people. And our commitment to PSADT is all about that. Now, there was another question, which was, well, what about if I use PSADT now and I also use Patch My PC? Is there something I could do together? And that's something that Dan and I and other engineering leaders at Patch My PC are working on, which is, for example, we just released in February our custom apps feature. If you had a bunch of applications already authored in PSADT, could you import them into custom apps? Not now, but that's on our roadmap. So that's an example of, yeah, if you use both, it might be better together, but we have no intention of going back and changing PSADT to not be free and open source. I don't know if you guys saw some other questions.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, that was the only one.
For DGM. Yeah. Any others we want to address here, or we want to go straight into demos?
I think we've got some up on the screen right now, haven't we? So address those.
That one on the bottom one, Dan, the one that says about releasing 3.9.4 yesterday. We're just releasing today, right?
Yeah. So last night we did a release preview we thought a couple of people. We thought a couple of people, and then we noticed that a bot on Discord had picked it up and announced it, and we're like, we actually decided there was so much in the release, we decided we're going to bump it from 3.9.4 to 3.10. So 3.9.4 is probably still there as a release preview, but 3.10 has just replaced it.
Yeah, awesome.
Will we show WinGet with PSADT in this presentation? The answer is no, I'm afraid.
We come back to a future webinar. I think we'll have something interesting to talk about.
There were a few. Oh, there's a couple more on that previous page, if you wouldn't mind going back, Corey. Oh yeah, so we'll copy file respect to robocopy parameters. So if you look in the script itself, you can see the robocopy parameters that are there by default. You can append to those parameters, but you can't replace them. Unless you edit the script.
The next one there is this stewardship will remain on GitHub going forward. I've contributed a PR in the past and I'd love to continue to do so. That would be very, very welcome. Thank you. We're going to continue to accept pull requests, and yeah, I mean, it's we're for the most part, everyone is still kind of working for free. Sean and Mo, they're doing their spare time. I just happen to be employed by Patch My PC now, so I get some dedicated time at this, and so does Dan G. But for all intents and purposes, this is still an open source project, and that's not going to change. So any pull requests will be most appreciated.
And in fact, Dan, it's probably fair to say you've been working on the engineering side to streamline it, right? You and Trevor. So now we have kind of a triage committee and a process. So I think we'll be able to make decisions and pull requests faster even going forward, thanks to Dan's work.
When using Intune Win32 app, can we get a function to force the PowerShell script to run at 64-bit if the machine is 64-bit?
Does deploy application Nexi do that already? If not, it probably should.
I think it does, doesn't it? Mo? I don't see why we shouldn't drop down from 64 to 32.
Yeah, no, we don't. Our EXE will launch it's compiled .NET code that deploy application.exe. So on 64-bit systems, it does run as a 64-bit process, and on 32-bit systems, it will run as a 32-bit process.
Is this question mostly because of the Intune Win32 app as the name, perhaps? So that's
I think it's just the Intune management engine that executes the process is 32-bit process. So perhaps it's a problem if you execute PowerShell.exe directly rather than using deployApplication.exe.
Okay.
Well, I think so. I believe that even if a 32-bit process kicks off deployApplication.exe, it will launch as a 64-bit process.
What's the benefits of PSADT over the functionality that already exists in Config Manager? Oh, where do we get started here? Config Manager doesn't really manage restarts, does it? And it doesn't manage running applications, unless this is something brand new that I haven't seen yet.
It does. It does have that feature now.
It does. It does. Okay. Well, I'm a little bit behind the times. I haven't spun up a Config Manager environment in a little bit of time. But does it do it to the same degree? Like, is it? I don't think it does block applications. Does anyone know that for sure?
No.
Okay.
But there's a ton more functionality in the toolkit that SCCM doesn't give you, like all the functions that we described earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the big thing, sorry, I'm going to jump in here too, because like this is one of the things that I always liked about it. The big thing about it is the standardization of the structure of how you do it, right? Like that is such a massive thing, especially as you scale up in an organization, is being able to say, I have this package that gets run this way and it gets run this way every single time. And I can hand this out to 30 people who all kind of sort of know how to put files and stuff in order, but they don't have to figure out the application object in Config Manager and how to write flags for this or the other thing and put it on that order. They just know run deploy - application inside of the application object for it and name it right. Just makes things a lot easier from that side of things. It's super good for standardization and large at scale.
And let me add also on top of what Jordan says, I think ConfigMan, having worked there for a couple decades, it's really good at the plumbing at scale of getting bits to devices. But then its logic, once it's doing the installation locally on the machine, is much more basic compared to PSADT. So when you really need to customize the install itself on a node, dealing with maybe customized UI or a little more complex sequencing, not quite task sequence level complexity, but maybe short of that. And you need to control more of the environment. That's where PSADT is really good, is being able to customize installation on a single node beyond what ConfigMan can do. And if you are in that state, someday in the future, if you have a need to move a lot of those apps to Intune, right? Now you can lift that whole installation experience from ConfigMan to Intune, and now you can use the Intune plumbing instead of the configuration manager plumbing. And this is where it is a little aligned with what Jordan said, is now, you can author app installs, for example, once and have it work in multiple management frameworks or stacks, whether it's Intune or ConfigMan or other products, right? So that's, I think, kind of its strength.
I'll add one more to the pile too, now that I'm thinking about it, because this is one of the things that always plagued me, right? Who here has ever had to, you create the application, you deploy it to the machine, you test it on the machine, and then it doesn't work. And then you have to go and you edit the application because you made a silly mistake, and you have to wait for the application to replicate out, and you test it again, and it doesn't work. And you can do all of that from one single test machine with just running the deployment application execution over and over again until you get it right. And then you put it in Config Manager, and it's going to work.
Yep.
Awesome. So we could probably pause on questions for a while and go back to the next part, Dan.
Sure. So the previous slides are all a bit PowerShell heavy. Appreciate not everybody out there might be comfortable with PowerShell or deeply familiar with it. But if you want to get started with the toolkit in an easy to follow fashion with the user interface, there are a few tools out there to do that. And the one that I'm most familiar with is one from the guys at Master Packager called Master Wrapper. So Master Packager is a packaging tool. It has a free version as well as a paid version with more functionality, but I believe there is a version of Master Wrapper even in the free version, so you can download that and check it out. This is what it looks like. You can load up an MSI. Let's make it package itself, just for fun. So it'll auto-populate the dialogues here. You can specify whether you want it to be silent or interactive. You can change your branding. You can specify your actions here for install, uninstall, and repair. I want to add this package. It's automatically giving me all the commands in PowerShell there. Pre-actions. Do I want to show a message? Do I want the progress bar? Do I want to manage these conflicting progresses to close the application, etc.? I can replace my messages with custom text. Pretty much everything that you would typically need to do has a button. You have a restart prompt with a countdown. You have a full script editor as well if you want to tweak any of the results or look at how the overall script looks. There's the install commands that have been injected in. And the equivalent for the uninstall. It's got the show installation welcome with the close apps. It's automatically pulled out all of the executable names from the MSI and put them in the dialog as well. Put them in the function, I mean. And these are a lot of the options that are in the config.xml.
So as regards to new options that we have, I spoke to the guys in Master Packager, and they're actually going to have a new version released by the end of this week with all the new options there too.
Yeah, so that'll be the robocopy and the log rotation stuff. Not sure what else is new. Definitely those two. Okay, so I'm not going to save and run anything from this. That was just a quick show. But one thing I did mention was running this toolkit main.ps1. Always run this when you're editing. If you're not running VS Code or ISE elevated, you'll get an error at this point, but you still have the variables and the functions available. So right now within my console, I can type get variable or GV for short, and I get a whole ton of variables. So there's common folders, program data, program files, (64-bit). There's some stuff here for Office as well somewhere. Gives you the current Office version. And if you want any help from the new functions, you can do that also. So here is the deploy application PS1, completely blank as default. But now that I've run that script once, you can see that. So I want to start typing execute MSI. It's already popped up. Now I want to know which parameters I've got. It's all the autocomplete IntelliSense is all there for me. Transform, why not? We'll have an MST. And what else have we got? Add parameters. Let's add a license key or something. That's an essential tip. So I was going to show the zero config functionality. So this is a completely blank default script. I haven't saved what I was just messing with there. Here we go. here is the toolkit. I've just placed the master packager MSI in this files folder here. And I'm just going to run deploy application to Alexi. It's actually pulled out the exe names from the MSI and worked out that I actually have master wrapper running already. So I need to close that before I proceed. I can hit the close programs, or I can defer if it's not convenient time. By default, it's 3 deferrals. You can configure this to as many as you like. You can also do it based on date. Now that was over very quickly because I actually have it. On to the next demo. So for VLC, we're not using the zero config stuff. We're actually going to fill out these variables ourselves. We're using a setup exe in this case, so it wouldn't be able to pull that data from the exe anyway. As you can sometimes pull some of this information from an exe, but it's not a database format like an MSI where you've got reliable stuff you can always pull out. So we've got the vendor, the app name, the version, the architecture, etc. all plugged in there. Pre-installation section, we're using show installation welcome with close apps VLC. We're going to allow the user the chance to defer. We're going to give them 3 chances to defer, after which it will just force the install. Persist prompts will just continually pop the dialog back up regularly in case they dismiss it and forget about it. Minimize Windows Force is one that I like to use. It's not there in the default PS1, you should know. If you execute the toolkit with all the default settings, it will minimize every other window on screen to show its own dialog, which can be a problem for some people, particularly people with lots of applications running on multi-monitor setups, traders I'm talking about particularly. If you want to minimize disruption, it's a good idea to put this in. Then we just show the installation progress. So if the user clicks OK to proceed, then it will get this far. Otherwise, it will exit. It won't even get to the next stage. Scrolling down, we've got the installation section. This block of code you can ignore. It's just there to handle the zero config stuff. If you define the name that we did define here, if this is not empty, then it will never execute this block anyway. Use default MSI will then equate to false. So we've got the exe version of VLC here. We're using execute process, giving it these parameters to silently install. And then there's some shortcuts we want to clean up afterwards. So we are removing the desktop shortcut using the mcommon desktop variable. Just highlight that and hit F8. I can see what that is down in the console down there. Same for this variable here. You can see that that is the all users start menu. So I want to get rid of the desktop shortcut, the release notes link, the documentation, and the website. You might typically want to get rid of the uninstall shortcut as well, but there isn't one here. Then we've got an example of using the new function, copy file to user profiles. So if I just quickly do a default install of this application. Show you what I'm talking about. So lots of applications have auto updaters built into them. They'll nag you if there's a new version available. And most of the time, the application doesn't have a background service running a system that can enable that upgrade process to work. It will just nag the user to install something that they can't install because they typically don't have admin rights. So wherever possible, you might want to disable these automatic update mechanisms for the application. And for the VLC, it is done with a file in the user profile, which is a bit of a pain. So if we launch VLC for the first time, we see this pop up. Regularly check for VLC updates. We want to turn that off. And there's also allow metadata and network access. I don't know if that's sending data about everything that I'm viewing over the network. It probably is, so I'm going to disable that also. And then typically for applications like this, good idea is to run procmon to see where it wrote to. Once you've figured out where that is, in this case it's app data, and we've got a VLCRC file in here. It's basically a big ini file, tons of stuff in it. Usually you can just trim that down to just have the essential stuff that you want in there, which is what we're doing in this package here. So I'm just going to clean that up quickly. Kill this app and remove it. My app data, go away. So I've put it in support files. So there's a folder here with a cleaned up version of this. And got a file extension. There you go. Turn off updates and turn off the network policy ask. Going back to my script. It's a good idea to test these things out before it gets to the point of you having everything packaged and pushed to Intune, etc. And so let's run the toolkit main for this one. Because I ran it previously for a different folder, it's not going to have my variables set correctly for the right files folder, etc. So I'm going to go into this particular demo, VLC, get my toolkit main for this specific project and run that one. Click back to my install. So now I can run any of these commands singly just to test. I'm running VS Code as admin here. I've got all my functions all available, ready to play with. This is the one that I want to test quickly. So if I just highlight that, if you want to run whatever you've got highlighted, you can hit this icon up here, or you can press F8. But this, if you look at the log output that's just come here, it's using robocopy. The whole list of switches there that are the defaults. And it has placed, if I can browse back to my app data roaming folder, it's placed it here. But it's also done it for all the other profiles on the system. What we'll do when we come to actually execute it for real, we'll run the install as the system account, and then we can check that it's actually popping up in my app data. Okay, so if you go down a bit further, we have the uninstall section. Seems I didn't get that far. We'll skip that. We'll just do the install for this one. Over here, I use PSXX to get myself system level access. /S means run a system. /I brings it interactive as well. And then CMD is just so I now have a command prompt which is running as system, and I can verify that with who am I? NT authority system. Let me see if I can make that bigger as well. There we go.
Dan, just want to jump in here for a second. We've got just over 10 minutes left. I think we're we've still got a fair bit of demoing to do, so we might want to either speed this up or else cut it short.
Yeah, we'll do.
Because we want to leave some time for questions, I think.
So there we go. There's the toolkit with its user interface. I hit continue. To do its thing. It's doing its thing. I will flick back to the other demo. Doing in this WinSCP. This one's using the new copy content to cache functionality. It'll copy the entire toolkit contents to a folder in C program data, safekeeping and a cache. It'll execute the install from there. If you don't specify a path to MSI, it will look in the files folder automatically. In this case, the new files folder for the new cache location. We want to remove a desktop shortcut. And then we're setting some registry keys for every user. And that's the function that you use to do that. But if we have literally got 10 minutes left, Dan, I think it might be a good chance to review if you've got any more questions come up.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things that popped up. Do we want to jump back? I mean, you can keep doing this in the background while we're talking through some questions, I guess.
Okay. Cool.
Hey, Dan. There's a really good question, especially considering we have a version we're releasing today and another major version, hopefully in a couple months, which is what's the recommended way to update the toolkit?
So for the V4 release, or sorry, actually even for this release, the only thing that really needs to change, I think, is the actual PSAppDeployToolkit main folder. Sorry, the PSAppDeployToolkit folder. You don't need to replace your deploy application script. It should just pick up all of the changes. In terms of V4, that should pretty much be a drop-in replace as well. Same sort of thing. You shouldn't need to upgrade your actual deploy application script. I'm trying to think, is there version changes on the config file? Yeah, that's going to be brought in as well. So any of your customizations in terms of the banner, logo, things like that, you will need to just overwrite yourself. So easiest thing to do is download the release, make your customizations to the banner and the logo files, any changes that you want in your config file, and then just replace that in any of the packages that you have.
Yeah, awesome, Dan. And
what I often do is use Beyond Compare to compare the previous toolkit to your previous customized toolkit to the new release from GitHub. And then you can see, okay, I've got my old XML here. I've got the new XML with a whole bunch of new stuff here. I can copy over my favorite settings from the old XML to my new one and keep that modified version of the new toolkit as my template for future use.
The other thing to keep in mind as well is if you're kind of like deploying out a whole plethora of apps through, say, SCCM or Intune, is there any need to go and update anything that's existing? It's really any, like, if you've got something that's in your environment that's working, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're going to be doing a revision of an application or a new version comes out and you want to update the scripts at that point, then that's a good time to do it. But you don't necessarily need to upgrade them in your environment if it's actually working fine as is.
It might be Dan worth us writing a blog in this space, because we know we're having a bigger version come later, 4.0, that's going to have some significant changes and hopefully not, but maybe some breaking changes. That's why we're doing a major update. So yeah, we'll try to put some out there to make it best practices for updating. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, when we actually release V4, we're going to have a I would say some sort of, I won't say an upgrade wizard as such, but we'll have a very clear process in what to do and how to go about it. But it should be pretty seamless.
There's a few more questions I think we can grab.
Yeah, I think there
was this one on WDAC, and I know we talked about it last time. Dan, I know you talked about some of the trickiness of WDAC and signing. I don't know if we want to add any more comments.
So I think WDAC is an interesting one. It's something that's kind of very hard for us to address fully, because essentially, if you're going to implement WDAC, you need to have a code signing certificate in your environment, like flat out. If we're looking at, or if people are looking at us to solve the signing certificate or signing issue in terms of the toolkit, we have a problem, because immediately as soon as you take like a deploy application and you try and customize it, you need a cert. So there's very little we can do to solve that, apart from possibly, and this probably will sound like I'm pimping our own product a little bit, but potentially if that's a custom app being brought into Patch My PC, then that's something that we could potentially sign, and it might be something that we'd be looking at further down the line for a solution for signed applications, and then therefore compatible with WDAC. In terms of how you would do that in your own environment, you're going to need to have a code signing cert. So that means setting up a PKI to do that. And that is something I think that we will probably get documented out and put in as part of our V4 documentation, just so that people can actually go ahead and do it themselves. But it's not something that we can really solve directly in the toolkit. And it's going to be a problem for any script that you run in your environment.
Yeah. And I want to add some extra to context just above and beyond that too, especially just because of the fact that like as an open source project, getting a code signing certificate, especially a public code signing certificate, is hard now. Like it's legitimately hard. You need to have a business. You have to have a physical address, basically, that DigiCert or one of the other providers is willing to like verify that you physically exist at that's registered to that location before they'll even begin to like talk to you on some of those things for stuff like that. So being able to get something that you can really have that high level of confidence that's like a physical token to sign something for all the machines out there, for everywhere that's used, right? It's a lot better for you to be able to, as an owner of that, as like internally to an organization, to get a certificate that you have as a business and sign it, that you've read it, that you know it's in it, and sign it at this point too. They've added some really interesting requirements in the last 6 months around EV tokens as well, that just acquiring a token just makes it significantly harder to do. You can no longer even acquire a code signing certificate without a physical token or an HSM. So you have to physically get a token or an HSM now. You can't just like get one and download it and have it on your machine anymore even.
Another question is, are deferrals still weird when used with Intune? I think the answer is yes. Nothing's changed in that respect. And I forget now exactly what the retry functionality is with Intune. It retries every 5 minutes 3 times or something, and it's every hour, and then it's every 24 hours. But whatever is the default with Intune, that's what we're limited by, unfortunately.
We did kind of see if we did talk about this before, to see if we could basically set up a local scheduler that would bypass Intune. It's very messy to do. And then essentially, I mean, yeah, we're looking at that.
Can you when it's finished?
Yeah, it's a really, really messy thing to try and look into. But it's not something that it is something that we're investigating. It won't be for V4. It might be something that further down the line. We have some ideas around how it could be solved, and it could be applicable to any other software distribution system. It's just essentially take them out of the equation. But in doing that, then we would kind of become a little bit more of a software distribution system ourselves. And that could be troublesome, I guess. A lot of people just want their apps to install and then us to stop running, but we would then have to like manage state through reboots and potentially start as a service. Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there about that. So it is stuff that we've given some thought to, but not something we're looking to do right now.
We should also say that, if we didn't get answers to the questions, we'll get those and respond to those offline. So if you didn't get your question answered today, don't worry about that. We'll get back to you.
You can always hit us up on Discord. Both myself and Dan and Sean and Mo are on there. So feel free to fire questions.
If it's a feature request or a bug, head to GitHub.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, of course, Dan and Mo, Sean and Dan. hopefully, not hopefully, this is for sure the start of many. You can see at the end, there was way more content than we could fit in 90 minutes. So we had to start squeezing. And this was a big update, but still minor compared to the major version that's coming later. And we'll make sure to get some of our conferences we're attending and sessions we're posting posted out there. And then Dan and Sean, Mo, anything else you guys want to add before we wrap up?
Tell Mo he has a majestic beard.
Dan is doing a couple of other sessions coming up related to PSADT, as am I.
Yeah, so
what are you doing, Dan?
I'll be at Partial Global DevOps Summit. I'll be at MMS MOA. We'll both be at PSConf EU, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other stuff. There's a couple of user groups coming up as well, I think.
Yeah, I'm doing a session at MEMUG Scotland, which is in Glasgow in April, and in June, or was it July? Tuned in Leeds. So there'll be PSADT sessions at those also.
Won't be going to any fancy conferences or anything, but I will say I'm personally, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I'm personally really excited to start implementing breaking changes and upgrade the code base. So
yeah. Move fast and break things.
Yep.
But keep it stable.
Yeah.
And we do have a Advanced Insights webinar from Patch My PC next week, which will be anyone that has been registered for this one will receive an email to register for that one. You're more than welcome to join and go over Advanced Insights and Patch Insights.
Awesome. I guess on that note, well, thanks everyone for attending. Thanks, Dan, Mo, and Sean for your hard work and other people that contribute. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.